Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Illinois channel. And we're going to be taking a look at some of the major issues that are facing Illinois right now and the nation. And Jeff, one of the big issues we're going to be looking at as we start off here is this effort by the governor and a number of people in the legislature to have a green energy bill go. And as our viewers will know, just in June, they tried to pass this during a special session. It failed. But behind the scenes, they're still working on it, and we'll have to see what comes of that. But we're going to be talking about that in some depth.
Well, as Jeannie Ives, a Republican activist, former candidate for governor in the Republican primary, former state rep, said on your show, Terry, just a few weeks ago, these guys are crazy. They're morons talking about the legislators who are planning to go green without any plan, any idea about the higher costs that would be incurred by residential users, tremendously higher costs by residential users, by industrial users, by commercial users. No plan that for reliability, no wonderment how you go from 7% of renewable production to 40% in 9 years or less. No plan. She just said, she might not have been overstating it. Jeannie Ives, she said, they're morons and they're crazy. I quote Jeannie Ives.
Well, there's some simple math at work here, and this is the thing that people need to understand. When you look at that magenta down there, that's coal producing almost 32%. Now, again, this is about 5 years old, but roughly still accurate. So roughly 30, let's call it 1%, is coal. And then that light blue is natural gas. Those are fossil fuels, which the environmentalists in this green energy bill say Illinois should stop using. Well, you're going to lose there about 40% of your electrical generation. What do they want to replace it with? That 5.7, that light green, and that little sliver. And that's your wind and solar in there. And Jeff, how do you get maybe 6, maybe 7%, let's say, of alternative energy? How do you replace 40% of electrical generation with 7%? That's the challenge. And even though this is going to be coming in down the line, we're not going to have a big surge in electrical production coming up in 10 to 15 years, barring something that's unforeseen, some tremendous breakthrough. And Jeff, before we discuss this further, I want to bring up an article. California, as we have seen in so many instances, has led on this issue where they want to show that they are the greenest state, and they have passed already requirements to do away with fossil fuels. And what happens? Blackouts loom in California as electricity prices are absolutely exploding. From the article, before we go further, let me state the obvious. California policymakers are providing a case study on how not to manage an electric grid. Furthermore, the case study shows what could happen if policymakers at the state and federal level decide to follow Illinois or California's radical decarbonization mandates, which include a requirement for 100% zero carbon electricity by 2045. So what we are seeing is that this is more or less the same thing that we're going to be facing in Illinois if those the progressives, the environmentalists, get their bill passed that says, Illinois should be moving away from fossil fuels, Jeff. And that's what people, I think a lot of people on the street have not caught on to what this means to them in terms of exploding costs, as we have seen that headline, and in terms of the fact that the grid, there's not enough electricity then to go around, and you have a grid that doesn't provide always-on electricity.
Yeah, what happens when people turn on the switch and they don't get any electricity? Is that the definition of a blackout? We had similar issues for short periods of time when ComEd 20 years ago was much less reliable. ComEd, to its credit, fixed that, but they were very short. What happens when people turn on the switch and it doesn't go on all night? What happens when the guy at Alton Steel, the CEO, Jeff Torres, who you questioned at a press conference, what happens when he says, look, we produce at night because that's when the utility rates go much lower. Well, is he going to be able to get solar energy at night? He said, look, I'm ramping up. I might be able to get 5% of my production from solar. How do you get to 40%? I don't think the legislators, if they've done this, if they've planned it out, if they have answers for these questions, I've not seen it. You haven't seen it. We haven't seen the hearings. We haven't seen the written reports. It appears that Don Harmon, Senate Democratic president or Senate president, Democrat in the Illinois Senate, it appears he hasn't seen it because he's the guy apparently who nixed that energy bill that was coming up 2 or 3 weeks ago and said, no, we're not going there. We don't have a plan. There seems to be a difference between Senator Don Harmon, the Senate president, and Governor J.B. Pritzker.
Well,
there's a split in the Democratic Party, apparently, right?
There's a split in the Democratic Party for some obvious reasons. One big group, which is pushing for elimination of fossil fuels, are the environmentalists. And the other main group, of course, in the Democratic Party are the labor people. And Jeff, one thing that's critical, and I'll follow up on what you just mentioned here. Just about last week, at the end of last week, we had both the business leaders come together and some of the people in labor. What I want people to remember is when we are talking about, a lot of people think it's nice to have a solar panel and have some car batteries in the basement, maybe for a country home where you can have electricity, or people imagine, hey, I can put these solar panels on my roof and run some of my electricity for the house. That's fine. But we are a major industrialized society, and so much of what we look for in America happens behind the scenes. Part of that includes the making of steel, which we need throughout our economy. In this press conference, I asked Jeff Berkowitz, who is the chief financial officer of Alton Steel, if they could operate without fossil fuels and nuclear. He started to say that they had a solar project underway, but that was only going to provide 5% of their power needs.
That if we were able to do that, that would maybe be 5% of our usage. We're such a large user that it really takes a significant amount. And we also run in the nighttime hours because that's when the utility rates are lower. So therefore, it doesn't match up with us because, solar obviously is produced during the day.
And that's true of everything, right? I mean, the fact is it's just not reliable 24 hours a day power. And as you say, at most it's 5%. So ergo, you can't run without fossil fuels or nuclear. They can't operate on wind and solar. And this is the problem that we're going to be facing as a society. A lot of these politicians, and we've seen this time and again, they love to have the press conferences. They love to be standing there as a bill is signed. They love to say, I was a co-sponsor, I was a sponsor of a bill, and we're going to make Illinois greener and more progressive, and we're going to make it so we're saving the planet. But Jeff, what is the cost? The cost to consumers, the cost of jobs to labor, that's what's on the table. And I think, again, a lot of people just haven't realized what they are facing if this bill goes through.
Well, Theyre, you were there, obviously, July 1 in the Capitol covering that press conference. You put it on your YouTube page, youtube.com/Illinois Channel TV. People ought to watch that. It runs about 35 minutes because there weren't a lot of politicians there, but there are a lot of people who know business, who are in business, and they understand about costs. They understand that their biggest cost when you get out past payroll, manufacturing and other, that's utility costs, that's energy costs. They were talking about it, projections of increased costs as a result of this bill for residential users, for commercial users, for industrial users, running at least 8, 10, 12% more. I don't know if they're talking those are annualized rates or monthly. We're talking exorbitant increases in costs. And where were the media? I guess they were getting ready for the July 4th weekend and taking a snooze. Well, you were there, Theyre.
Here's the thing. There were media there. I don't want to say they weren't. There was media there. Jeff, this is one reason, not to slap myself on the back, this is one reason you need an Illinois channel, because we put 36 minutes on without commercial breaks. And issues like this are too complex for sound bites, where most people get their news from local news. They're going to do local news is often going to maybe, even if they do a package, it's going to run a minute and a half or 2 minutes. people need to get more information than what they're getting, which is why you and I, among other things, are discussing this at the moment. Let me just, before we leave this topic, one of the people there was a union representative. And again, this is one of the reasons why the bill has not passed, because the union members out there are very concerned about their jobs. And I asked this one union representative of the pipe fitters, are his union members, are they aware of what's facing them? Here's what he had to say.
When we go to union meetings, it's a topic of discussion all the time. There is fear about what's going to happen, what's the future going to look like, how are we going to, how are we going to survive this when some of these sources of employment for many decades, I mean, generations are, at risk of closure, as soon as, 5 to 10, 15 years.
It's not just unions, it's not just businesses, it's everyone who is turning on the lights, who's turning on the stove, who use electricity in their homes, because as one more last reminder here, blackouts loom in California as electricity prices are absolutely exploding. And Jeff, we have looked into the future, and it is California blackouts. So the politicians
go
here
on.
can
We
do what
gotta
they
go on
want,
to
but that's
issue-
what's facing us.
Issue number 2, crime exploding in Chicago and across the country. And we've seen that on the July 4th weekend. What do we have in Chicago? We had 100 shootings and
Let me
including
quickly
two-
bring up just to show people. As you can see, Chicago Sun-Times and Philadelphia
Right.
Inquirer down there. Number of shootings over the long weekend, people can read it, but it's horrible in every city. But look at how Chicago
worse in
is standing
Chicago.
out.
It's just an outlier. And this stuff from State's Attorney Kim Foxx, it's happening all over. It's just BS. I wish Kim were here to address these numbers. Yes, it's happening all over, but Chicago is the leader in a very bad way. 100 shootings in this past weekend, including 2 cops, 18 fatalities, way up from last July 4th. But, Police Chief David Brown tried to do it to his credit. He said he was to flood the zone, 12-hour shifts, more cops. What did we get? We got more shootings than we had before. I mean, you got to say that's not a good result. Why is that happening? And you can't blame it yes, it's going on around the country, but here it's worse. You can't blame it. Yes, it went up in 2020. And then what does Fox says? Well, COVID. COVID? People stay indoors. That accounts for more murders, more rapes, more carjackings doubling in the city. This is ridiculous, ridiculous. And I think the people who are running for governor on the Republican side, they're talking about this, but they can't say things like culture. They got to get very specific to the numbers, how bad it is, and what they would do about it to fix it. Because they're running for governor, so can a governor do anything to fix a local problem, a mainly local problem? And
Well, and we
we'll
had,
address that, I hope.
I mean, Mayor Lori Lightfoot of Chicago, continues. Just recently, she continued to blame the guns coming in from outside the state as if she is powerless. But we have, not only in Chicago, but we have politicians. First of all, we have the elected prosecutors, as we've talked about before, and people are aware. Whether it's Kim Foxx in Chicago or Kim Gardner in St. Louis, out in L.A. and Philadelphia, we have these prosecutors who want to show that they're reimagining crime fighting by not putting the criminals in jail, by having no cash bail. And the police are arresting people, and then they are immediately released and go back on the street. So what is happening is we are having a record number across the nation of police resignations, of police retirements. And Jeff, we had a hearing in Congress just recently. Senator Hawley of Missouri talked about what he's hearing when he goes home and talks to his law enforcement officials.
Wherever I go, police officers come to me and they say, we are desperate for help. We are outmanned, we are outgunned, we are overwhelmed, we can't recruit people, our morale is collapsing, we feel we have no support. It is a simple reality, and the American people are feeling it. The people in my state are feeling it. They are afraid to go out at night. They're afraid to go out on the streets. They're afraid to drop their children off at school. I mean, this is not the United States of America that we should have.
And I think he
Terry,
speaks for a lot of people. Go ahead.
Well, Terry, what people want is they want protection from the police, and they want the morale not to be torn down. I mean, Chief David Brown, chief of police in Chicago, he said, and I think a lot of the media were tone deaf, he said last week, and it really wasn't reported, he said, you know, the perps, the criminals, the accused, the defendants, however you want to refer to these people, they have strong advocates when they go to court. But the victims of crime do not have a strong advocate. He didn't use the name State's Attorney Kim Foxx, but clearly he was pointing the finger at her without naming her. Clearly he was pointing the finger at Chief Circuit Court of Cook County Chief Judge Timothy Evans when he said, you know, they don't have they don't have an advocate. And when he was talking about people, as you referred to, getting out on bail, the police arrest them, and before you know it, with 6 hours or less, they're back on the streets. Well, he's talking about Timothy Evans, because Evans points out correctly that people have a presumption of innocence, but also the law allows bail to be set, cash bail, for dangerous criminals. And Kim Foxx, who's the state's attorney, should have her assistant state's attorneys in court, or in bail court, bond court, arguing to post bail. Instead, she says, well, the judges want this. It's not me. That's not an answer. When you see Kim Foxx opposite the public defender, chief public defenders in Cook County, it sounds like she's on the same page. And this is what you're talking about, Terry, when you talk about social justice warriors around the country who are not representing the people who want these perps. They want them put away in terms of getting strong sentences and put away in prison for long periods of time. And Brown says they're coming out too soon from prison. They're coming out for COVID releases. They're coming out for no cash bond. People don't feel safe. They don't feel safe.
Look, I didn't have a chance to bring this graphic together here, but let me just share some of the information on crime surging in major cities across the country. We have in Oakland, California, carjacking is up 95%. In Atlanta, rape is up 83%. In New Orleans, auto theft is up 22%. And in Los Angeles County, arson is up 22, almost 23%. This is, people, the first duty of government, I would argue, many others have argued, is to protect the people, to have a safe civil society. Other things, are on the margins. You can talk about any number of different issues, but people should expect to be safe. We're going to talk a little bit later here about some of the people running in the Republican primary for governor, but I was just in Ottawa last week, or the end of June, I should say, and happened to talk to some of the candidates. Let me at this point bring in a comment from State Senator Darren Bailey, and he talked about the crime and talked about talking to people on the south side of Chicago, which has a bad crime issue.
When we're downtown Chicago and on the south side, meeting a lot of friends, they want to be protected. We watch the news, and the news tells us they don't want police. That's entirely incorrect, and I challenge them. I said, go visit with your elected officials and find out what on earth is going on.
Well, there's Darren Bailey. He's running for governor. He's running from downstate, the deep southern part of the state of Illinois, 4 hours or so out of Chicago, and he's talking about safety. He's talking about, it's not a matter of just talking money. It's talking about police, people in the communities. He says around the state, as you asked him, Terry, these issues are not just Chicago or non-Chicago. It's around the state. The culture that we're creating which these candidates refer to as culture. Gary Rabine calls it culture. He's right, because we need to give people safety, and we need to understand. I mean, Chief of Police in Chicago, David Brown, said that this practice we have, he didn't refer you, not his words, but mine, is basically catch and release for murderers. They catch people, they arrest them for murder, and before you know it, they're out on bond. And he says that the chief of police in Chicago says that's creating an unsafe environment for everyone. And we need to have victims of crime who have a spokesperson, a strong advocate for them in court, stopping these people from getting out on bond, stopping them from getting released from prison early. The governor talks about, he's very proud, Terry, because he says we had criminal justice reform in this last legislative setting. Okay. Well, where was the criminal justice reform that made people safer from rape, from armed robbery, from homicides, from carjackings? I don't hear the governor talking about that. Because the numbers are going way up, not down. How is criminal justice reform that he passed making the citizens of the state of Illinois safer? That's the issue.
Well, I think law and order is going to be a major issue, not only in Illinois in the gubernatorial race, but also across the country. And we see other places. I can never remember the congresswoman's name from Michigan, Shahib or part of this.
Taleb, or whatever.
I mean, here yesterday she was on the news saying we ought to defund. So many people have been talking about the defund the police. She's talking about defunding ICE. She's talking about defunding the Department of Homeland Security. I don't know how to process this. This is just, to me, political insanity. And I think that this is going to continue to be a big issue. And we see in Florida, we have Governor DeSantis, Republican governor of Florida, is giving bonuses to police for being on the streets longer. We just saw Senator Hawley of Missouri. He has a bill that he's proposing, and instead of defunding the police, he wants to hire 100,000 more police. So, I mean, this is going to be where the voters can decide what kind of a future they have. Jeff, as we move towards the end of the show, let's get some bites in here from some of the people running for governor. Here's former state senator Paul Schimpf, who we talked to, and he was talking about why he's running and to contrast himself against Governor Pritzker.
Governor Pritzker has a very different vision than I do for Illinois. Governor Pritzker has said that he wants to make Illinois the most progressive state in the nation. That is an extreme position that the people of Illinois do not agree with. J.B. Pritzker has also shown that he's failed as a leader. Illinois has the ability to be the strongest state in the nation, but what is holding us back, it's not our people, it's our dysfunctional government and our lack of leadership out of J.B. Pritzker in the governor's mansion.
Well, Paul Schimpf is talking about a parental bill of rights, and he's right to be talking about that, but he perhaps needs to step it up further, take it to where the rubber hits the road. Critical race theory is a major topic. We'll come back to that in other shows and just focus on it. But let's just say for now, critical race theory is a major topic on the people's minds across the state of Illinois. It's coming up in their schools. A lot of people, they're hearing about it. They're not familiar with it. What is critical race theory? And is it hurting? And is it hurting what their kids are being taught? Is it hurting the morale around the state? Is it tie in with the police issue we're raising? And yes, it does. Because critical race theory talks about the Marxist division. Critical race theory talks about blacks being oppressed, whites being the oppressors. Black Lives Matter. That Black Lives Matter does matter, but why isn't Black Lives Matter or their spokespeople talking about the 50% increase in homicides, black on black homicides mostly, in Chicago in 2020? Because doesn't it matter when you get 250 more black deaths from black criminals as opposed to police, which are almost minuscule relative to that? So this idea of the culture and parental rights and what's being taught to our students across the state, and whether we have respect for police, the good police who are not doing anything wrong, whether we
Look, we have a
just
social war going on here, and Illinois, the voters need to decide, are they going to want to be a progressive state, whatever that means, and all that means, or are they going to want to be supporting what is others say are traditional American values? I also caught up with Gary Rabine, a businessman who's running for the Republican nomination for governor, and he talked about the culture in Illinois right now and how it is driving people out of the state. And he spoke, you bring up critical race theory, he spoke about that. He also spoke about the bill that was recently passed in the legislature that requires the teaching of sex education to very young children. Let's listen to what Mr. Rabine had to say.
It's job creation that we're losing out on, it's taxation we're the highest on, and it's ruining our culture. If you think about those three things, it covers it all. You know, what we're doing to our police is terrible. You know, taking this great trade of policing where these kids grow up, guys and gals want to be heroes, right? And now they're not heroes, they're looked upon as zeros, right? By some of our politicians, by some of our press, right? It's craziness. When we look at our education system, I guarantee you most of our teachers don't want to teach sex education in kindergarten, first, second, third grade. I can tell you, the teachers I'm talking to don't want that, right? So I think this is we're getting led through a Pritzker, Whitefoot socialist agenda, and we've got to stop it.
Terry, it's all coming together. You know, President Biden, we're taping this on July 8th. President Biden was in McHenry County, Crystal Lake, McHenry Community College yesterday, July 7th, as we tape. And what's he talking about? He's talking about infrastructure. He's talking about his $1 trillion program, really his $1.9 trillion that he wants. He may only get $1 trillion on that. And then after that, they put out press releases. He doesn't mention crime there, but then he says, oh, it's really the Republicans who are causing this crime because they won't support the $1 trillion, $2 trillion, $6 trillion in spending that he wants. Like that's going to filter down, that's going to get to the more police, and that's going to get to having respect for the police, and that's going to get to the social justice prosecutors, including Kim Foxx and the others around the country who are not prosecuting crime, who are getting these folks that David Brown, the chief of police, talks about. They're turning them out. It's catch and release, my words, essentially saying catch and release for murderers. You catch them and then you release them. Is that any way to run a real? Is that what Biden's talking about? Is he going to stop that? Of course not. Of course not. President Biden is concerned that the Democrats are on the wrong side of this police issue, and now he's trying to point the finger at Republicans. Republican politicians running local, state, nationally need to point the finger right back at the Democratic Party. Most of these social justice prosecutors, the great majority of our inner cities, they're run by Democrats. They are Democrats. They need to own this.
Obviously, the Democrats nationally are seeing this in their polls, that they are behind the eight ball. And as a result, just this past week, Jen Psaki, White House press secretary, and others in the administration were trying to say it was the Republicans who were saying defund the police, which is, I would have to say, at the very least, bold to try to rewrite the history of just the last 2 years.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. Biden and Jen Psaki and the Democrats nationally, locally, Kim Foxx, even the mayor.
Jeff, let's say this. We're going to run out of time here, but we're going to say, folks, thanks for watching. Follow us on Twitter. Follow us on YouTube. Give us your comments. And Jeff and I will continue to be following these issues as we go along. Thanks for watching.